Back again with a new episode of Rewriting History with me, the Goob. Today we're talking about Brewers Cave and other aspects of America's hidden history. Going to cover some other writings and metal plates. But before I get into Brewers Cave, I wanted to touch a little bit on some of the things we've covered already, Michigan relics and Burroughs Cave, which I think I criticized them a little bit more than is fair. I was pretty open to them, but I think I was going a little harsh on them, actually. The more stories of this nature that I find, the more I read into them, the more I learn about them, the more patterns I see emerging. And all of that, it's 100% of them get dismissed. 100% of them are, hoaxes and fake, right? And some of them have bigger stories built up behind their hoaxness, like Brewers Cave, like Burroughs Cave, like the Michigan relics, especially the Michigan relics. And some of them, like I'm going to talk about today, like the Newark Holy Stones, it's pretty silly, the reasons that are given for dismissal. So the default is dismissal, obviously. And I talked about some of the silliness in like the Michigan relics. For example, the copper plates that were examined, exactly one of them was found to have been modern rolled copper using modern tools. And they used that one copper plate to then go, all of these other copper plates that don't display any of these properties, well, they're obviously faked and frauded as well. And something that I don't know how clear I made it initially in those videos is that in all of these examples, at least the Michigan Brewers Cave and Burroughs Cave examples, other people are faking and forging these artifacts, right? So it's debatable whether or not the people finding these artifacts are forging them. The mainstream says they are, but it's pretty well accepted that other people are forging these. So there's 10,000 to 30,000 plus Michigan relics, right? And the two guys that were finding them were selling them to people. Those people were selling them back and forth. They were getting traded amongst people. It wasn't just a direct source from these two guys, right? And so there was many opportunities for other people to make forgeries and slip them in amongst these original artifacts, whether you want to think the ones that are originally being found by these people are forgeries or not. There are outside forgeries that are entering the game. So, again, that copper plate, right? That's likely something that didn't even come from the people who were finding the Michigan relics. That's likely something that got slipped in by someone else amongst all of the back and forth trading that happened with these objects, because it didn't even if the other ones were forgeries as well, they were forged using different methods, right? It was a unique copper plate with modern rolled copper, which the other ones were not. They were hammered copper. And I mentioned, the clay tablets that weren't fired, and the method they used to dismiss those was fully submerging them in water for multiple days at a time, and then going, oh, they've softened. These obviously, couldn't have survived in the ground in Michigan for hundreds of years. I don't know how they were buried. Were there rocks on top of them protecting them? Who knows? So the idea that they couldn't have survived all of those years in the ground just because they couldn't survive, a week straight being submerged in water, I don't know. I leave that up to you guys. But the point here is that, the discovery of frauds, of definitive frauds, doesn't even exclude, that what these guys were finding was real potentially, because these frauds were being made by other people. And the takedown attempts of like the Michigan relics, the news reporter that was spent over a year of his life dedicated to this story, to exposing the frauds of these two gentlemen. He was going around and basically harassing people in town, like going up to anybody in coffee shops and wherever he could find them, the grocery store, of anyone who had any interaction with these two gentlemen, and interrogating them. And the best he was able to get were two stories, essentially. One from the guy who supposedly attended an event, a presentation by sorry, I'm getting my stories confused. That's from the Brewers Cave. But the best he could get was an interview from one of their neighbors. They lived in an apartment building. They were doing this for like 40 years. There's 10 to 30,000 of these artifacts, right? So if they created all of them, that's a lot of pounding and chiseling pretty much all day, every day. And only one of their neighbors complained about noise. She said, yeah, they were making these hoaxes. She never saw them, but the noise they made in their apartment. So she complained they were noisy neighbors, and that was used to condemn them. And this, like I said, this guy dedicated over a year of his life to harassing these townspeople, looking for stories and evidence against these guys, and that was basically the best they could get. So there was also, I made the claim that they were involved in every single finding of these Michigan relics, and that the findings stopped after these two guys died. That seems mostly true. There seems to be a few examples that may predate them of these Michigan relics being found by a couple other people, but it does seem that they stopped after these guys died. There was a Brigham Young, a Mormon guy who actually was convinced that these were fakes. He went on some digs with these guys, found some artifacts. One of the artifacts he found was actually like underneath the roots of a tree, a pretty old tree, so harder to hoax, right? There's a lot going for the Michigan relics as far as being valid, and same for the Brewers Cave. I think it's a little less strong, but pretty interesting nonetheless. So let's get into the Brewers Cave. Hopefully some of you guys are here with me. I seem to have picked up a couple viewers that are not from Low Value Mail, so that's cool. I think 100% of my viewership was Low Value Mail crossover until quite recently. So, and one of those viewers has been Veldane, I think, pointing out a lot of really interesting stuff. On that, real quick, I got some comments on one of my videos. People were claiming, the people coming over to America were this group or that group or various different groups, and my answer to that is yes. I think many different groups came over. From the dating that's been done, it seems the majority of the travel that I've seen evidence of is between around the years 100 BC and 400-500 AD. I think several different groups from several different cultures came over. And, these weird amalgamations of languages make a lot of sense. In that context, you're getting these different groups interacting with each other. Language changes quite frequently. I mean, the English of a couple hundred years ago is essentially unrecognizable, compared to the English of today. And so yeah, these weird languages that kind of resemble Hebrew and kind of resemble other things, but don't exactly resemble them, kind of makes sense to me. So on to the stories of Brewers Cave. It's got a lot in common with these previous stories that I've talked about. This guy, John Brewer, was looking for arrowheads, and there's a much more in-depth backstory to this cave finding than the others, or at least than Brewers Cave, and they involve a lot more people that seem to be real people and stuff, I guess, trying to build its credibility. I don't think these details are too important. Basically, the guy's looking for arrowheads. He finds a cave, and he starts digging in the cave for arrowheads and stuff, and he finds some interesting objects. He finds these boxes that are covered in wood and pine pitch or some type of, like tar. And inside that, these stone boxes. And inside the stone boxes are these metal plates, these little metal booklets with this strange writing on them. Over the course of a whole bunch of time, because everything was buried in mud and dirt, he uncovers these giant mummies, which were the thumbnail for the video here. He originally drew a sketch of them, and then his granddaughter, spiced them up, made them a little artistic, added some color. But they were these like 9 and 10 foot mummies, and a lot of mummies, not necessarily mummies, but a lot of human remains around that size have been found. A lot of 7, 8, 9 foot tall skeletons have been found. So if we're calling those giants undeniably have existed throughout the world, throughout history, and even exist today. You look at Andre the Giant, some of these caches have been, a lot of these are kind of singular examples, right? Or you get a few skeletons of this size. There have been a couple caches of larger, amounts of these skeletons, these giant skeletons being found in the like 7 foot tall range. So yeah, giants definitely existed. They were described as having Mongolian features. They had gold and all kinds of stuff on them. There were a whole lot of these boxes. There were these other tablets and objects. There were these, he said a bunch of coins. I don't know if they were metal coins or not, but stamped with like scorpions and other objects stamped with scorpion patterns. Lots of stuff in this cave, just like in Burroughs Cave. And just like in Burroughs Cave, he took out some of this stuff, but left most of it inside of the cave. He never showed anyone in this cave, although there's some conflicting stories going on here. His son supposedly saw this cave, but his son unfortunately passed away. So, not really anything to work with there. And he, just like Burroughs, had many excuses as to why, pictures couldn't be taken, as to why people couldn't come and explore it. And the location of this cave is not known either. But something interesting about this cave is that carbon dating has been done. And the carbon dating, there's some conflicting reports here as well, because the initial carbon dating, I'm not sure who it was done by, but I don't believe it was done by Brigham Young University. I don't believe it was done by the Mormons, and that came up as modern. Then this Brigham Young University guy got involved. He became friends with John Brewer. He went back and tested these again, supposedly 10 times to verify the results, really get them, solid. And he took samples from the interior part of this wood rather than the wood close to the pitch, because his thinking was that the nuclear testing that was happening somewhat nearby could have contaminated, the dates with the carbon from those nuclear tests. He then got consistent results. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. Somewhere in that 100 BC to 400 AD range. I can't remember the exact dating. I think it was like 400 AD as well as, one of the discussed dates for the Michigan relics. Yeah, carbon dating has some issues for sure. I definitely agree with you there. But it is interesting that several of these finds have been carbon dated, and they do seem to point towards a relatively consistent time period of that, like I said, 100 BC to 400, 500 AD time period. So, and they still get dismissed. So one dating presenting modern dates, he claims that the testing probably wasn't done properly, wasn't accounting for the somewhat nearby nuclear tests, does some more dating, gets these older dates. Now, something that occurred to me is that these were buried in several inches, if not several feet, of mud and dirt. And so the carbon penetrating all of that mud but not penetrating that relatively thin layer of wood and tar. Um, I don't know if that adds up. I don't honestly know enough to say whether or not that adds up, but it's a little makes me a little bit skeptical. This same guy, right, who supposedly did this carbon testing, he has some other stories that don't really seem to add up. Because according to most accounts, no one else besides Brewer and his son ever went into this cave. He claims he did go into this cave. He made friends with Brewer, and eventually Brewer did lead him into this cave. He also tells a story, and it's possible I missed something when watching these videos. I actually went back and re-listened. Didn't seem like I missed anything. Maybe I missed something, because there's another guy who claims to have been friends with Brewer, and he gets taken to the general kind of area of this cave, and he asks where the cave is, or at least Brewer points to the cave, but he describes that he points kind of in a sweeping motion over the horizon. So he really didn't even know the exact direction, much less anything else about where this cave was. And then he asked him if he could go. He asked him if he could take pictures. Okay. And he said he had tried, but the pictures never came out. So then he asked if he could go and take pictures. And Brewer goes, yeah, well, the entrance to the cave is pretty small. You're bigger than me. I don't think you'd fit. So didn't take him, right? And this is after Brewer had dynamited the main entrance of this cave, just like Burroughs had, and then created a secondary entrance, a smaller entrance that he tunneled in through. So this story is told by one fellow, and then it's again told verbatim by this other guy that did the carbon dating. And again, maybe I missed something. Maybe he was repeating this guy's story and not telling it as himself, but he was using first person pronouns. I don't know. Then he later goes on to say that later he does actually get taken into this cave by Brewer. And he gets forced to strip down to his t-shirt and underwear because, again, it's a small entrance. And so to fit through, he needs to take off his clothes, which I don't know how much sense that makes. If you're shimmying through this tiny little tunnel, I feel like you'd probably want to be covered up. I don't know how much, pants are going to prevent that from happening, but this is the story that he tells. So now this cave that no one has been into, according to most sources, this guy has now been into. Does he take photographs? He doesn't really say, although later he does say there are photographs of all of this stuff. They just won't release them because they're afraid of people misusing the photographs. There was a journal by John Brewer. John Brewer claimed no one ever saw his journal. Some other people claim to have found his journal, but you don't get to see his journal. All of these photographs, all of these plates that he took out of the cave, all of the photographs that were taken inside of the cave, none of those are released to the public. The journal is not released to the public. That image, a couple little sketches from the journal are, like a sketch of the cave itself and the sketch of the mummies. There are images of those online, but it's debated whether or not those are even from the journal, because according to John, no one ever saw his journal. This guy who went into the cave, he goes on to say that Brewer had found a map in the cave of at least 7 other caves located nearby, and they climb up a mountain and go into another cave. There's no mummies in this cave, but there's all this other stuff, coins and boxes and stuff like that. Again, no photographs of any of this stuff. So it's rather convenient how these stories, they offer very little evidence. They offer very little proof. These people are very secretive of their finds, which to some degree I understand, because people who do come forward with this kind of stuff, they do generally get their life ruined. And you can look through history and find many, many, many examples of people who came forward about these new, ideas and had their life ruined and were ultimately right and vindicated, but typically after their death, often, at least not infrequently, after their suicide, because they had their life ruined to that point. And then there's these other people who are supposedly hoaxers and frauds. That's how the mainstream views them, but I think many of them likely are legitimate, and they all had their lives ruined as well. So the desire to keep things secret is understandable, but it is mixed with, all these people did come forward with their stories. They did present at least some degree of evidence of these things, but then, weren't willing to really share it completely. And Brewer was supposedly very concerned with archaeologists and other groups coming in and destroying these things, and he, wanted to preserve them. That's why he left so much in the cave. But then he was also supposedly smashing these stone boxes with sledgehammers to get the metal plates out. So just a lot of contradictions involved. Brewer died, I think, 10 years ago. So the cave has been lost. No one knows where it is except for this one guy, allegedly, who won't share the location, won't share the photographs, won't share anything. And supposedly the only reason he became friends with John Brewer is because he hung around for years without ever asking him questions about the cave, essentially. He admits this himself. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? The carbon testing, the carbon dating by the Mormons. Obviously, Mormons have some motivation for things like this to be real. They allegedly did it 10 times. That seems excessive. I don't know if you would truly do 10 tests, especially, just to confirm the dating is accurate. But after the first 3 returning the same results, I feel like that pretty well confirms it. So I don't know. This is all coming from that one source who he is saying different things than pretty much every other source on this cave. I don't know if maybe he's just making this stuff up. So kind of take that with a grain of salt because, I don't know. But Brewer did dynamite the cave entrance. He did keep it hidden. He did keep it secret. According to him, no one ever saw the cave other than his son who died. No one ever saw his journal. A couple photographs did come out of these plates. A couple of these plates were tested, but other than that, really, all of it was kept very secret, according to Brewer himself. As for the plates that were tested, one of them did come back seemingly to be made out of like modern casing, bullet casing brass. It seemed to match that. But again, it's one of these situations where I think an individual plate was tested. This is a website that's got some images from Utah. These are not related to this cave. They're just some markings in Utah. These copper plates are the few images that seem to circulate from the Brewers Cave. And I think I have there's that. I think that's the same plate. Yeah, that's the same plate. They're slightly larger. You can see the markings on here a little bit better. It does. I don't know Hebrew, and I guess this isn't necessarily exactly ancient Hebrew, but it is seemingly pretty reminiscent. It looks similar visually to me and my untrained eye. So, there's one of the plates. There's one of the boxes that was wrapped in wood and tar, stone boxes. These plates you can see are pretty small. They were like 3 to 5 inches. This is, again, not a part of the Brewers Cave on the left here. I think this one might be, though, a part of the Brewers Cave. And I believe these images down here are a part of the Brewers Cave. I can't quite make out what's going on here. It's hard. It's not the highest quality picture. hard to tell what exactly is going on that metal there. Some lead discs. I believe these are also separate from the Brewers Cave, but this is all found in Utah. All of these are found in Utah. That might be Brewers Cave. It's very similar to what was found in Brewers Cave at the very least. And again, these Brewers Cave here with this looks similar to Hebrew to me. And some more metal plates down there. Very, very few images able to be found on this stuff. These are supposedly the drawings of the mummies, the giant mummies. These are some of the Brewers Cave plates. No expert at all here, but those don't necessarily look like modern copper to me. Kind of looks like it's been pounded out. I'm not an expert in any way, though. I believe this is also potentially a Brewers Cave image and just a bigger image of one of the stone boxes. So let's see. So one of the things that Veldane brought to my attention were the Newark Holy Stones, and I want to pull up the Wikipedia article for these. They're new to me. I had not heard of these before he told me about them. And in doing my research for these episodes, I have found a long list of examples, along these lines of like metal plates being found in America with strange markings or stones with strange markings. Every single one of them is dismissed. Some of them I'm not even able to find results for on the internet with the direct search terms, at least the names that, I found people referencing them by in videos and such. Others I have, and I've read up a little bit on them, and some of these they don't even give the effort of dismissing. Like, they're just not talked about. They're just so basically forgotten that they haven't even been given the effort of a dismissal. They just are forgotten to history, and so are covered up through those means. But they seem valid. So these Newark Holy Stones, I didn't want to read the entire article, but I don't remember where the important parts are, because the reasons for their dismissal are pretty silly to me. So these are found in Ohio. Bradley Lepper of the Ohio History Connection discovered that a fragment of the wooden burial... Oh, this is talking about the carbon dating. So 85 AD, right? So right in that time period that all these things seem to be falling into. Another radiocarbon dated group of artifacts that is fully dismissed despite their dating coming back, to these time periods. So they're linked to the Lost Tribes. I wish I had highlighted the parts of this that I wanted to read initially. So, but basically the reasons, if you guys want, go through this article on your own time. I thought it was pretty entertaining just in its silliness. But essentially the reasons that they give for their dismissal is that the guy who found these things was looking for proof of the Mormon religion. He believed that, the Lost Tribes did come over here and that he would be able to find evidence for him. So he started digging in mounds, just like the Michigan relic guys, and he eventually found these Newark Holy Stones, and they were eventually carbon dated, going back to that time period of 85 AD. And so that's essentially the entire reason for the dismissal, is, hey, this guy believed in this stuff, and so that's why. But the evidence for its forgery is pretty darn weak. The guy copied the runes from some of these objects and allegedly made several mistakes in the copies. So people looking at that go, oh, he doesn't even know what he's doing. So obviously this guy's a forger. Look at all these mistakes. But then they looked at the real objects and go, oh, the real objects are actually written correctly in this old Hebrew language. And they don't believe that the guy who found these understood Hebrew or had the knowledge and ability to forge these things. So they're essentially saying someone else forged these things, buried them in these ancient mounds, and then left them for someone else to find. And this guy happened to stumble upon them. They happen to be so well forged that the dating goes all the way back to 85 AD. But they're total forgeries. They're totally dismissed. These totally aren't real, and you don't need to pay attention to them. They are, however, in a museum in Ohio, so you can go visit these things. You can go look at these things. They're pretty cool. You can see, the writing on here, which I guess is actually Hebrew, and to me, doesn't necessarily look exactly the same, but I certainly see similarities, right? So yeah. What was some of the other stuff I wanted to talk about? Okay, so these other copper plates. There are several examples of Native Americans with copper plates with writing on them, and this is almost all of these have been totally lost to history. The stories and the plates themselves. There are a few examples of surviving plates. We really don't have any evidence of them. Like, we don't have photographs of them. We don't know what's on them. Most of them are buried in the ground. Some get dug up every 15 years, some more frequently, but they're all hidden away and really not viewed by the public or anything. So a couple of these plates do still exist and are still in Indian tribes' possession. More of these plates were lost, often in these Trail of Tears type marches. These Indians would get uprooted from whatever location they were in and moved somewhere else. And some of the plates would make it through these marches. Sometimes people would trade these plates for food and stuff to survive. Another reason these plates are lost is because some of these tribes started burying their significant people. They would put a plate in their grave with them. So they just dwindled over time. But there are these copper and brass plates and lead plates that exist in these Indian tribes. And some of the reports of these plates, there were some very early Christians in early America who supposedly were saying things along the lines of, like, the surest way to heaven is to follow the guide of these plates. They had seen these plates of these Native Americans, these sacred Native American plates, and I assume they were written in Hebrew. I don't think they stated that outright, right? But I assume they were written in Hebrew and basically talking about Christianity. These early Christians in America saw these plates and said that the surest way to heaven was to follow the doctrine of these plates. So there's several examples like this. Again, very difficult to find any proof. You're not going to find images of these plates, as far as I can tell, whatsoever. But even references to these plates in early America and stuff, it's difficult to find. But there's enough that it seems to have been pretty commonplace for many of these different tribes to have these copper brass plates with these writings on them. Not all of them are Hebrew. There were other plates that seemed, again, in an unknown language, but not representing Hebrew in any way, that just depicted the history of the Native Americans. Like, they continued making these, passing them down through the elders of the tribe, recording major events like them moving and stuff like that. So, and the Michigan has massive amounts of copper free for the taking, essentially. And so there was actually a lot of metallurgy going on in North America with these Native Americans. It's not very well known. It's not widely talked about, but there was plenty of metallurgy. The natives were using metal at various points in history. And there's this theory that I've stumbled upon very recently that's rather intriguing. I'm going to try and look more into it, of the idea that the copper that fueled the Bronze Age of Europe actually came from Michigan. There's supposedly many, 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 many tons of copper that has been removed from the ground in Michigan, and that is nowhere near, the amount of copper that I was just talking about the Native Americans using is like less than 1% or something of the amount of copper that was supposedly removed and mined. And so where did all this copper go? At the same time, over in Europe, there's a question of where did all the copper come from? They potentially don't have enough copper in Europe to explain the Bronze Age. So was it coming from the Americas? And that would also somewhat line up with, all of these different groups coming over, mailing back the copper. These different writings that you're finding in this around 2,000 years ago, the Minoans allegedly are responsible for shipping all this copper from Michigan over to Europe. And I don't know. I want to dig more into this. It's a very interesting idea. It makes some sense on its face. I like it, but I got to dig more into it. There are supposedly some ancient bronze artifacts and copper artifacts that have been found in Europe where they tested, the makeup of the metal, and it did seem to match Michigan metal. So I was fully on board with the idea of people coming to the Americas, many, many, many different groups, and really repeatedly coming to the Americas. But the idea of having a full-on trade of this copper going from Michigan to, back to Europe is a bit larger than my initial thoughts were, but I'm open to it and I'm going to explore it and see where it takes me. And I've really enjoyed this, hidden history of America exploration. And I wish I could do a better job of presenting all of the different examples that I've encountered, in my research, because I've really focused on a very small select group of examples. But as I've been digging deeper into these examples, I keep stumbling upon other examples. I find one here, I find 5 there. I've found a lot of examples of these things being found in America. There's a lot of similarities across a lot of these things. There's a lot of I see a lot of patterns emerging here, and it seems pretty concrete to me that there was a lot more going on in early America than we've been led to believe. And I hope you guys, have also found this interesting. Does anyone have any interest in calling in Mr. Watson? Mr. Watson, I wanted to talk to your friend, the glass blower, about the Lycurgus cup. So I talked about the Lycurgus cup previously on this show, and I, as a complete, know nothing about glass blowing, alleged that this is such a masterfully made piece that it probably couldn't be made even by a whole lot of people alive today. And I would love to get his opinion if he would check out this cup, maybe call in one week and just share his thoughts on just how difficult something like this would be to make. And I'm not even referring to the color changing aspects, just the actual glass creation itself. I mean, I see no seams on this glass. It seems absolutely perfect to me. And, it's all the way around. Somewhere on here you'll find some images of the back, also just absolutely stunning and perfect. I would love to get his opinion on, is that something that I'm overinflating its difficulty potentially. I don't know. I'd like to hear his thoughts. So, anyways, that's this week's episode. Tune in next week, and feel free to call in, share your thoughts, share your opinions, and I'll catch you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in, fellas.